And once again, welcome to NAA's Mental Health Awareness Week. I'm your host, Tiana Heath, the Senior Manager of Industry Relations with the National Apartment Association. We are back for our final part in this series on mental health. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The NAA Antitrust Compliance Statement is on the NAA website where you can review it at any time. If you have any questions, please reach out to the NAA staff member and we will be more than happy to help you with any questions. As always, our information today is for educational purposes only, and we hope that you enjoy our presentation. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. As we close Mental Health Awareness Week, we want to encourage everyone to continue to make what you've learned this week a priority. We hope that we have shined a light on these topics and given you a new perspectives around mental health. We strive to bring resources to our membership, not just during Mental Health Awareness Week, but all year long. And we want to thank our Mental Health Subcommittee for their help in guiding us to make impactful changes and keeping mental health in the conversation. Today, we are pleased to close our series with our speaker, Will Soto, the Chief Diversity Officer of Mental Health First Aid for the National Council of Mental Wellbeing. The Council has been kind enough to partner with us over the years to bring our association timely and relevant information to our membership. After today's session, head over to the Mental Health Awareness webpage where you can find more resources and the webinars that we have hosted this week. We will also provide the link in the comments. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the question and answer box or the chat. And with that, Will, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you very much, Tiana. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I know it's the Friday before a holiday weekend, and so we'll try to maybe get us out on time, and hopefully we're all starting the holiday after this. I'll start by saying Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It is, I'm going to put in, our organization, the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, has a toolkit that has information, data, facts, as well as where people can access support, help, and resources for mental health issues and challenges. And so please, when you copy that link, bookmark it and save it. It can be a useful tool for everyone. And just a word about that and the connection here with the National Apartment Association. We all know that mental well-being connects to all areas of life. So housing, home, family, our jobs, our physical health, and really everything. And so it's all connected. And part of the goals of the workshop today are to see how diversity, equity, inclusion are a part of strengthening organizations, communities, and can help advance improvements for the systems and the care that the communities that we serve are going to get. And so we're going to talk doing some sort of DEI 101 ideas to start, like what are the big principles of diversity, equity, inclusion that cut across all levels. Talk about some research shown and evidence-based strategies for success. And then looking at those different levels of DEI. There's the individual level that are our interpersonal skills and how we treat one another. There's the organizational level. DEI mostly exists largely in organizations in the workplace, and we're all from different organizations, so thinking about it at that level. And then also the societal level, where we are working with and for communities of people that have needs and have housing needs and care needs and treatment needs, whether it's my industry or yours. And how do we involve those communities in ways that represent some of these principles of DEI. And so I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Forgive me if it's a little clunky. As I do that, as I transition to the slideshow mode. And while I'm doing this clunky transition, I will say that if you need to ask any questions along the way, if something seems you know, confusing, or you'd like to know more, or say something or disagree, please put it in the chat. And happy to stop, between slides or at any time really, and turn this into more of a discussion. So again, I mentioned that, I sort of covered this already. We're starting with some DEI 101 principles, then strategies that work, and then talking about those different levels of DEI and then that last part, takeaways and homework. It's not really homework, but things for us to think about and things for us to continue learning. And so that while there are a lot of DEI principles, I lifted out 4 important ones that I think, really apply across all the levels of DEI, all the different types of work, all the different challenges. I think these apply, and they're sort of important principles of both DEI and in a way of living in a democracy. And the first one is voice. We all hear that a lot, that DEI is about making sure everyone has a voice at the table. And that is an essential DEI principle, that people need to have a voice at the table. That's part of our democracy because people should have a say in the outcomes that impact their life and health. And so that leads to the second principle that I want to talk about, which is participation. We don't automatically have a voice, and we don't automatically have a say in all the different systems and processes that affect us. And so that we need to create ways for people and communities to have meaningful participation so that they can provide input, so that we can know what their needs are, what their challenges are, where they're not being served well, where they're not being served at all. So that we actually have to create structures and opportunity for that voice, and we call that participation. And so I'll give an example. In my organization, we have a DEI committee, and we have a representative from each of the different parts of the divisions and departments in the organization, so that they sort of become two-way feedback mechanisms to let us know what are the challenges, what are the DEI concerns, what are the problems around our organization, and those can inform our DEI efforts. So that's one structure for participation. And there are many possible structures for participation. A very obvious principle of DEI is fairness. And we know from those laws, starting with the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the other laws that came in those years afterwards, that taken together we call the EEO laws, that those are about fair and just systems. Those are about making sure that no group is being treated differently or unfairly. And so this is a key and important component to DEI. And it's also about fairness, meaning who gets to decide things. So DEI systems of creating structures and opportunities and committees and places for participation, for input, for consultation from people that want to have a voice in their own outcomes, that's about the fairness as well. And we know that in order to do this right and do this well, fairness actually involves some data. If people are not being served equally, if people are not having equal access and equal opportunity, sometimes we actually have to go out and seek data to find out where problems are. And so fairness sounds like a simple idea, but it's complicated. It involves work, it involves investigation, it involves data, it involves channels for communication. And ultimately, all of this is about what people want, and people really want respect. There's lots of sort of surveys that have been done in the workplace and in society, and people the top thing that people say they want is respect. And we don't have a great definition for respect, but one thing we know is that people feel respected when they're acknowledged. So there's some level of acknowledgement that has to happen. And that's meaning that we have to acknowledge their opinions. We have to acknowledge their perspectives. It's easy sometimes when we work with like external communities, and we work in the organization that requires some professional knowledge and some certifications in some places and experience for us to sort of minimize other forms of knowledge. So one thing that respect includes really is developing those DEI skills and competencies of sort of knowing that we have to get past those ethnocentric ideas that we know better than other people, and that we might have, because of our work, because of our certification, because of our professional status, that we have some knowledge. We might have knowledge about program development. We might have knowledge about policy or law and other professional knowledges, but we also have to not minimize the knowledge and intelligence of non-traditional knowledge, community knowledge, real life experience, non-Western knowledge, people that were educated in other places, but have information and have ideas that deserve acknowledgement and are important. Also, I think for real respect, people have a right to information. It's hard to feel respected when you're given information on a need-to-know basis. It's hard to feel and be respected when you don't have all the information. It's hard to participate meaningfully when you don't have the information. And so this is true at that societal level. It's also true in our organizational level. I think all of our staff across the organizational chart can contribute their best work better if they have the information, if they know the directions and the challenges the organization are facing. All too often, some of that information is held at the higher levels, or at the leadership level, or different levels of leadership, whereas actually it's a DEI principle, and will advance inclusive teams and also high performance teams and organizations when we think about information as respect. And that also applies at the societal level. Knowing about access to services, knowing about access to programs, getting the right information is part of these DEI principles. And so these principles cut across those different levels of DEI that I talked about before. These can be applied at the individual level, the team level. If you're on a team that has a manager and 6 workers, it applies at the organizational level, and then also at the societal level, where we're trying to advance equity and fairness and justice in society. How do we live up to those principles? What are some DEI strategies that we've seen that work, that build those inclusive and better performance improvements that we want? And I think probably we've seen that it doesn't always work. There's a lot of research recently that tells us that some DEI training doesn't work in organizations, and the outcomes are the opposite of what people were seeking. We've seen in our country recently that there's a backlash against DEI because there are many people and groups that feel that DEI is excluding them, and then they're fighting it and trying to get rid of it. And so the first strategy is, we've seen that there are some things in this field, this vocation called DEI, that don't work and have accidentally and unintentionally built polarization and backlash, which can get in the way of progress. So one strategy for advancing DEI, advancing the progress and the goals we want, is building a big tent, making sure that DEI isn't for some people, but for everyone. And so I want to just talk a little bit more about that. If done well, a strategy that's really good for DEI leaders and DEI programming and DEI efforts is making sure that DEI isn't about like one right ideology that then excludes other people from the conversation, We don't want to minimize or, you know, take away a seat at the table for people that have like wrong beliefs or wrong ideologies. But actually, that's the opposite of what founded this idea behind having DEI programming. We want a seat at the table for everyone. When DEI first started, that's what was missing. We we saw that there wasn't a seat at the table for everyone. Everyone didn't have the same ability to, you know, include their ideas and their perspectives. Um, Shirley Chisholm, famously a congresswoman from Brooklyn, New York, famously said, if there isn't a seat at the table for me, I'm going to bring a folding chair." But that idea isn't that she wants to take away someone else's chair. That idea is that everybody should have a seat at that table. And I think DEI is done not as well when people feel like, oh, well, there's a right ideology and there's some faction or group that are the DEI insiders want to um, exclude or minimize people that have different ideas. And that's not the original idea, of what we're trying to achieve. And I think it's an important thing, and it involves certain, again, DEI skills and competencies that we try to build: humility, fallibility. It's an important skill that leads into doing the strategy successfully, is to not believe that one group of people holds perfect knowledge or owns truth, but rather invites everyone to a dialogue. And when you have that strategy, and that's built into how you do DEI at any level, that's been shown to work. It's also one of the sort of founding ideas of the field of DEI also is that we were trying to remove insider-outsider dynamics that previously in the past, with regard to race, class, gender identity, people were being made outsiders. They didn't have the insider dynamics that enable people to participate well, to have their ideas further, to have influence, to impact outcomes. But DEI shouldn't create new insider-outsider dynamics where the DEI group excludes other people. So it's an important thing to remember that if the goal is to remove insider-outsider dynamics, we have to operate in such a way that we are not creating new ones. The next strategy for success is about cultivating relationships of mutual respect. And this is something we'll talk about a little bit more later when we talk about DEI at that societal level for the communities we're serving in our work. But that idea of cultivating relationships of mutual respect is about making sure that we don't have my agenda versus your agenda, or the agenda of the organization versus the agenda of the community, but how do we co-construct and co-create a shared movement for improvement? And how do we acknowledge that that there's things that we don't know and we have to learn, and go out and respect people as we're going to learn more about the needs and the wants of communities and how they would like to change systems, and how they would like to improve their systems that affect their lives. And then the last strategy that's really important is it's generally more effective to change processes and protocols than to attempt to change hearts and minds. A lot of DEI workshops that maybe we've all attended or I've attended have done a lot to try to change people's thinking or mindsets or hearts. But actually, when we move DEI from like hearts and minds to pen and paper, processes, protocols, putting in new steps in a system that enable more voice or enable more participation, putting in steps in a system that makes sure that everyone has information or access, that's more important than grandiose prose or having someone speak eloquently. And so making sure that we're thinking of what are concrete changes we can do, what are some, how can we look at our operations, our order of operations in different ways that we engage customers, clients, staff in processes, and how can we elevate voice and participation and fairness and respect through some steps, through some protocols. Sometimes that means extra time, sometimes it means extra work, but usually the outcomes are, make that worthwhile. That's why we're doing the work in the first place. So I referred to this earlier. A lot of times I've gone to DEI workshops, and DEI is just talked about in the larger umbrella sense, but actually the challenges at different levels of the work are very different. A great example of that is between these top two. The outermost little circle here is the societal level, and the next one is the organizational level. At the societal level, the problems and challenges that are the DEI problems and challenges are sometimes about access to clean water, voting rights, not having health insurance, not having information, not having ability to have opportunities to get equal and fair care and treatment for health issues. That's very different from DEI at the organizational level. At my organization, all of our staff has employer health insurance. We all have a salary. We all have certain things that are very different from the societal level. And so just using those two as an example, the challenges are so different at each of these levels of DEI that we can't think of them in the same way, because when the challenges are different, the solutions have to be different. The mitigations have to be different. And so we really have to be thinking when we, are talking about DEI, what level of DEI are we talking about? Very often we'll go to a workshop and and the discussion is about microaggressions or microabrasions, or the words and the language we use, and how to be more thoughtful and sensitive about how people want to be referred to and their identities. Well, that's probably at the individual level, and we should identify that. And we're talking about skills and recommendations for how we can be better in our individual skills and competencies and knowledge and cultural competency. And that's not the same as that societal level. And so just quickly, you can see that the societal level here are some examples of what that means is, how do we do community partnerships? How do we, influence funding and investment for equity and access and better care for people? In my field, what are the social drivers of health? What are the root causes of inequities, of unfairness, so that we can, you need to know the problem in order to address the solution, which is different from the organizational level. At the organizational level, we're talking about our policies. We're talking about training and learning for all staff. We're talking about information flow. So people have the information and tools and professional development to be able to contribute their best work so that they have an equal opportunity for success and to be able to thrive. We have to make sure that there's staff input. If you can see this, these are small print. Staff, their perspectives are important. They have ideas. They're identifying innovative ways to improve work, to improve the outcomes of the organization. How does staff have input and voice, and what are the mechanisms we can create for that? Then there's the leadership level. And for this, we're talking about all levels of leadership, top leadership, but also all people managers. Basically, there's a different DEI climate and culture in every team in an organization, because every team has a manager and people follow their cues from their manager. So one important thing to know about at least the organizational level is management training, and making sure that our people managers are trained well and have inclusive traits and skills and competencies of inclusive leaders is very important, because that's how our people experience the organization. While there is one culture and people do culture efforts at their organization, if you have 20 people managers, you also have 20 subcultures where there's a different DEI climate and experience for the people on their team. And there's something that that connects now to this next level down, which is the group and team level, that has to do with that. While leaders influence the group and team level, groups and teams themselves actually have a big impact on the culture of a team and whether that culture is inclusive and equitable and harmonious. And that's because of something that we talked about a lot when we were younger, or if you're a parent, you talk about it a bit, peer effects. And there's a lot of literature recently. There's a new book out called The Peer Effect, I believe by Dr. Syed Ali and Dr. Margaret Chin, that talks about the idea that while there are intentional DEI efforts and intentional culture efforts that are done by leadership and by organizations, that when the thing that changes norms and patterns of behavior on groups and teams more than anything else is the peer effects of people tend to want to do what their peers do. And when someone joins a team, there's a time period where you're watching and feeling and learning. What do my peers and colleagues do here? How do they, do they all go above and beyond? Do they all just sort of do the minimum? Do they all just try to cover a part of their body and make sure that they, retain their employment? Or do they actually try to create better systems together and work hard and reflect on successes and debrief and try to improve together and support each other? A lot of this comes from peer effects. And so understanding, the psychology of teams and how do we build psychological safety, which has been shown to be like the most important ingredient in high performance inclusive teams. I think the study was actually done by Google, and Google looked at their teams and they tried to identify who their high performance teams and look at what the characteristics were. And first they looked at the makeup of teams, like do teams have, one analytics person and one good people manager and one good person that has this on the Myers-Briggs, personality test. And they looked at all sorts of things. And then they found that their best teams that reported being inclusive teams on surveys and reported feeling all sorts of DEI values on their teams, and as well as being high performance teams, it was those teams that reported that they had psychological safety. And then I also spoke already about the individual level, which is just sort of building those skills and characteristics and remembering them, like humility, empathy, curiosity, which is really key to everything, being interested in other people's ideas and being okay of living in disagreement, but not because we want to try to win and always advance our ideas, but being interested in other people's ideas. That skill and trait of curiosity is sort of key to everything, and it affects cultural sensitivity. It affects cultural competence. It affects everything else. I see something in the chat, so I want to. Good. So this was discussed already. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and just see if anyone, before I continue on, if anyone has any thoughts or questions or something that they'd like to share. And just you can put that in the chat. All right. Well, feel free at any time to do that. I guess I will go back to my. And so now I'd actually like to, since I sort of primed you already for that, ask you to put something in the chat. And of those different levels, and again, it was individual, group and team, leadership, organization, and societal, which level of DEI is your organization made progress on? Or which level have you seen in workshops or efforts or initiatives? Is your which of those levels is your organization thinking about and working on? And then also, if you want, which level is currently a challenge? And if you want to think about why one of those levels is a challenge for your organization, um, feel free to share that. And sometimes it really helps to know what your peers from your peer organizations are doing. Where are they having success? What are they working on? What would they like to embark upon? And where do they find challenges? So if you can, put that in the chat, and it will be nice for us to see what we're doing across the organizations that are a part of this association. And I'll try to type in the choices, the levels again.
Well, I added those in for you. So in
Oh,
the
great.
chat, the individual, group and team, organizational, and societal levels of DEI, just in case anybody needed them as they're thinking about where their organization is. And people can feel free to answer either in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll be watching both of them.
And while you do that, take your time. I'm going to begin to talk a little bit about the societal level. And I think ultimately most people, that's where their passion lies. Their passion lies for the places where we see the most inequity. The biggest path towards just and fair societies are in different communities, from different class levels and different levels of education and different types of housing, different levels of education, differing school systems that provide unequal education. We see some places where, we know that there are places where there's a lack of clean water. We know that there are parts of the United States where there are reservations for Native Americans and tribal people, and we know that their care. So the societal level is probably where most of us are most passionate about and where we know most of the work has to do. And your work related to your field and my work in my field, there are ways that we can better serve communities in that societal level. And so I'm going to talk about that as sort of a challenge area that we should all be thinking about, not just in our work, but in our lives.
Well, you're getting some responses in the chat in regards to some of the
Okay.
challenge areas. And there's been a few comments that have said, we talk about it, but we don't put it into practice. Like that's part of the challenge at any of the levels, is that it's talked about, but then you're not seeing it literally come to life. And then some others have answered as well in regards to organizational, as well as group and team. So
Yeah, it is challenging. I'm wondering, one of the challenges, I think, is that it's easy to say and talk about the idea that, everyone should have a seat at the table and everyone should have voice and participation. But there's a certain reality, even in a democracy, we don't all have a voice at the table. Not everyone can be at that table. Not everyone has the time. When our government makes decisions, we don't have all 300 million of us getting to go in the chamber in Washington, D.C. So there actually is a challenge in that. How do we find out what the needs of communities are? How do we find out how the systems aren't serving them? How do we find out what improvements they would like? So that's, for starters, a tremendous challenge. So it's easy to use DEI terms like voice at the table, but how do we do that? So I'm interested if anyone does that already, and how do you do that? And again, your field is different from mine, and we could talk about that in the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, but I'm interested in the National Apartment Association. How are you doing that? And how do you learn first of all, like, how do you learn data? I think that's one of the key challenges. The first challenge is identifying where the problems are. You can't solve for problems until you know what the problems are, who's having them. And so how do you get data that about housing and about where there are housing challenges? How do you get data? How do we learn this information? So that's something. And the same applies, by the way, at the organizational level. We need to get data about how well our professional development offerings are being taken up and being used, equally. And we need to get data about how people feel that this is a great example, that their holidays are being honored. We have to make sure that that their, parental responsibilities or caregiving responsibilities, if it's a generation above them or anyone that they're caring for in their lives are honored. And how well are our policies and our inclusive practices as teams doing on that? So seeking this data is a challenge, and it's not always clear in the types of surveys we use, and maybe surveys aren't even the best way to get this data. I think we often rely on surveys. They have a value, but there are probably lots of other ways to get good data.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you saw this one, but Sarah mentioned that it's also just really trying to be an advocate for their team members. So whether it's knowing about that holiday or what have you, but when we see something that we're doing something with that or trying to be, I'm assuming, Sarah, in that comment there, that it's just staying in front of and helping to be that voice for all the reasons why you said sometimes maybe we don't feel we have that or we don't have that chair at the table or what have you. So there's some good insights in here.
There really are. I think, thank you, because I'm juggling my notes and other things, and
Yeah.
I thank you for lifting that out. I think that's right. So people in the chat who are talking about part of being a good manager is sort of acknowledging and advocating for the people on your team. That's the first step, just acknowledgement. It's amazing how important that is. I don't think every staff member really believes that the policy is probably going to change next week when they, say something, but it really is impactful when the person they say it to acknowledges, wow, that's interesting. And this doesn't, this seems like something that should be looked at. And this is something that we should bring to HR. And then sort of closing the feedback loop and actually going and bringing it to whatever the appropriate person is. If it's someone from HR and saying, hey, do we, have we thought about our holiday policy? And, we do have holidays for X, Y, and Z, but what about P and Q? And have we thought about that? And just because they can take those days off as personal days isn't the exact same. And one thing we know is that when everybody's off, it's very different than when I'm off. When I'm off, I come back to work and there's a lot of emails. I missed out on meetings. I have catch-up work to do. When everybody's off, that's a holiday. But acknowledging that people are also taking a risk. When people speak up or speak out, a lot of times managers think, oh, this is a challenge. This person is, a troublemaker or some other word. This person is always leading dissent. But I think one of the key DEI skills for managers that really is going to help every situation is acknowledging that people generally, like, for the manager to assume best intentions, and that when people speak out, they're taking a risk, and that they're probably trying to help the organization, and they're probably they would like the organization to be better. And so just that skill alone, that I see that Kelly O'Toole and a number of other people in the chat have sort of pointed out, that just how the manager reacts. And Sarah, whose name I don't want to attempt to pronounce, but just acknowledging that the person is bringing something that's important to them and that they're bringing something important is really just that mindset of managers, that competency is very important. And that's, again, part of respect. And then ultimately, if you bring that to the right person as a manager and you close the feedback loop and say, I brought this to HR and they are going to consider it the next time they revise this policy. They don't revise every policy every year. So there's sometimes reasonable responses that people are okay with, but if they know that their input, that their idea was listened to and considered. People tend not to think that they're going to win everything, but they do want to know that their idea was considered. And so that's an important idea. And I see now that actually, I'm glad that I asked this question for the chat, because I see most people are concerned with DEI in their organization and teams. And so that'll help think about how we talk about some of the rest of this webinar, which we're sort of running out of time. I do want to touch on the societal level a bit, but I'll go quicker on it, because I think everyone here seems to be more concerned with that organizational level, the team level, and the people that work in your organization. So we will close with some of that. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. I'm having a hard time advancing my. Try this again. There we go. Nope, it went back. There we are. DEI at the societal level. So quickly, we all have some responsibility to serve our community. In nonprofit, it's probably our primary responsibility. In nonprofit, the community's needs and goals should become our organizational goals. And so inherently, it's our job to better serve our communities. But the same is true in the for-profit world, actually, because the communities are customers and clients. And so the for-profit world also has to better serve their communities and understand the community's needs and wants. And so these are sort of essential questions for that societal level. And the first or the second thing is, well, what communities does your organization serve? Thinking about your jurisdiction or the region or the sort of, the places and people and communities that you're serving, and make sure, are we leaving anybody out? How well are we serving all of the people and communities in our jurisdiction? Thinking specifically, this is where the DEI ideas come in. Which communities' needs are we not meeting? That's question 3 here. Are there communities or individuals whose needs we're not meeting, and can we do better? How do we learn about those needs? And then how do we use that to inform our own practice improvements, our own process improvements for the purpose of better serving our communities? Some of this is easier said than done, as you pointed out in the chat. And some of it is about initiating new efforts that haven't happened before. And so just a word about that. We say this a lot, that change is slow. But particularly for the organizational level, which you all are concerned with, sometimes the process of doing the change is an outcome in itself. So I think this is an important idea. While change is slow and equity outcomes are slow, and sometimes we even see because of politics, because of current events, we see sometimes that sometimes you take one step backward before you take 2 steps forward. But in DEI and DEI work, and especially at the organizational level, an important idea is when you put in some of the mechanisms, some of the structures to begin efforts, the process is an outcome. So I'll use again an example in my organization. We have a staff DEI committee. And so our staff DEI committee, just the act of every 2 years making sure that there's new opportunities for people to join that committee and to make sure that different parts of the organizations are represented, giving that committee like real work, things that they get to input on, decisions that they get to advise on. If they get to advise on what topics should we have the next year's DEI learning about, what should the learning objectives be? And then creating task teams. When there are particular challenges or particular areas where we've identified a DEI challenge, whether that information came from a survey or whether that information was brought by people and the staff DEI committee like agrees this is a challenge area where we need an effort, creating a task team that's a time-bound task team that has representation from different levels and different parts of the organization, that has diversity, that task team is like sort of becomes an advisory body or even a planning or design body for the effort, as opposed to just me doing it or leadership doing it. That's an important process, which itself is an outcome. Hopefully it's going to lead to measurable outcomes. Hopefully it's going to lead to concrete changes. But part of DEI is that the process is an outcome. So that's an important thing to remember. Just getting the initiatives going is going to help matters and actually helps people have trust and faith in their organizations. And ultimately, that is a key for success, that the people that work at an organization have trust and faith that the organization is accepting its accountability for trying to make progress. Pretty much people know that progress is hard, change happens slowly, it doesn't happen overnight, but putting in those structures, putting in those committees or creating ERGs and funding them. ERGs are employee resource groups for people that don't have those. And then giving them, an actual opportunity to communicate ideas or to lead things in some of the different recognition months. For example, in our organization, we have our ERG sort of lead some of the activities during Black History Month, or we just have a new Asian American Pacific Islander group that we just missed it for this May, which is not only Mental Health Awareness Month, but Asian American History Month. But next year they're going to be leading in that. And so giving meaningful opportunities for ERGs is another thing where sometimes the process is an outcome. I'm going to look back in the chat before we go to our next slide. Yeah, really interesting. And I'm really interesting about the housing, and single persons who have an average income are having possibly some of the bigger challenges. And providing lists of city services can be helpful. Yeah, a big thing that is an inequity is just the different amounts of information that people have about programs that can help them, programs that can benefit them. Probably a big piece of data that one could have is to learn about your communities, or what are the languages that are spoken. A lot of times actually not going out and getting that data, people assume, in different parts of the country, for example, that, the second most spoken language is Spanish in most communities, where because of recent immigration patterns, that's not always true everywhere. And we're learning all sorts of things about, our communities and what some of the linguistic challenges are for getting information about programs that can benefit them. And so again, it comes back to getting information, getting data. An easy one is getting data about languages spoken in the communities of your jurisdiction, as well as, other challenges. I'm gonna, because of time, get to the sort of the takeaways and the homework. And sort of summing everything up, advancing DEI involves organizations to think about and work on some of these questions. How is your organization currently learning about the needs of the communities you serve? How might your org be able to advance this work? How does your organization learn from its own practice towards improving how it serves communities? And what data do you think would be necessary in order to learn from your own practice? And so that's really a big idea of how do we learn from our own practice? How do we take a look at and reflect how well we're doing and what we could be doing better? And sometimes we're too busy to do this work, but this work is actually what makes our organizations more effective and more successful and become higher performances, taking that time for reflection and and this is, again, and it includes people. When you include people in your organization to be in a process where they're contributing their ideas, they have opportunities to be smart, opportunities to be innovative, opportunities to, share an idea that hasn't been considered yet. Or identify a challenge that could be problematic for the organization that hasn't been identified yet. So doing some of that reflective work and thinking about some of the bigger questions with your staff is also a DEI practice that, again, is in itself an outcome. And I think I'll stop there and just thank you all for participating in this on the Friday before a long, important holiday weekend, and wishing everyone fun, happiness, and taking a break from the good work that you do, and enjoying time away.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness in talking about each level and how we really affect that. Thank you so much for joining us today and this week. I appreciate your continued support of mental health and the National Apartment Association. Stay tuned as we bring more resources and updates around this topic that touches everyone. Be well, everybody. Thank you.